Now that we have added the category CRUD operations in our web application, let me stop that and switch back to the Azure portal. We have our Azure cache for Redis right here. When we have to integrate this inside the .NET Core application, we need the key to access that. So inside the settings here, we will click on key. We have primary key, secondary key, but what we want to work with is the connection string. So we will copy this connection string, go back to our application. If we go to our app-settings.json, we have a connection string for our database. Right here, let me create a new connection and I will call this Azure Redis connection. And let me paste the connection string. Once we add the connection string, we have to configure the program.cs file to actually use that connection string and configure the distributed Redis cache. And for that, we will require a NuGet package. So we will go to Manage NuGet Packages for solution, Browse tab here, and we will search for package caching.redis. We have the Microsoft package, which is microsoft.extensions.caching.redis. Let's install that package inside our Redis cache project. Let me install that. And perfect, that looks good. Let's close that. Now we need to configure Redis cache inside the program.cs class file. So inside the builder.services, where we are adding services to the container, we will have to add one more, which is builder.services.add distributed Redis cache. When we add the Redis cache to our application, we have to configure some options here. And inside that option, we have the option of configuration where we need to pass the key. That key is inside app settings, so we can access that using builder.configuration.getConnectionString, and we need to pass the key name, that is Azure Redis Connection. I was able to use this directly because I added that inside the block of connection string. That's why I can use the built-in helper method getConnectionString. That will retrieve the connection string and configure our Redis cache. Simple as that. We did not have to do anything complex. It is just basic configuration because Azure Redis cache is already managed for us. We did not have to do much configuration. Everything is taken care of. So with that, let's continue from the next video. Now that we have added the connection string for Azure Redis connection in our project and we configured that in the program class file, let me close all the tabs here and open up the home controller. If we examine the views inside categories, we have the index view where we are displaying all the categories, but when we load this view, we are getting all the categories from database. Let me copy this view altogether and paste that inside home index. So right here, let me paste that. I will cut this model and paste it at the very top. So we just have a table where we are displaying all the categories, and the heading here we can change that to cached categories. So here we are just displaying a list of all the categories in a table format. That is pretty straightforward, but inside the home controller index view, we will actually have to load the categories and we will have to pass that. Before we do that, let me switch back to the presentation that we had. Inside here, when we get a request, we first check if that request is in cache. If not, we get that from the SQL database and we add that to the cache. So first request will not be inside the cache. We will have to go to the SQL server. So we need to add application DB context using dependency injection. That way we can go to database and retrieve all the categories. So inside the constructor here, we will have to add application DB context using dependency injection. Then inside the index action method, we will have to create a new list of category and we will have to retrieve them from the database. So let me create a variable here. I will call this cached category list. We will check here. If not, string.is null or empty. If the cached category list is not null or empty, then this means we are getting that from cache. In the else part, this will be null the first time, so we will have to retrieve our cached category list from database. So underscore db dot category dot toList. This won't be the category list, it will be the category list right here. Let me just call this cached category to avoid any confusion. So right now we are not using caching, we are just retrieving that from the database. We will return back to the view and we will pass category list. So with this, if we run the application on the home page, we will again see all the list of categories. Let me show that. And perfect. This is working as expected. But now we want to cache these categories, and next time when we get the same request, we do not want to go to database, we just want to get that from the cache. So let me stop the application here and let's implement caching from the next video. In order to implement caching in our index action method, we need to retrieve that using dependency injection. We already configured that in the services right here, distributed Redis cache. So in order to get that inside the home controller, we will get the distributed cache. We will add the using statement, add that in the constructor here, and we'll say underscore cache is equal to cache. Then the first time we will actually retrieve everything from the database. But at that time, if we go back to the presentation, we have to add that to the cache. So if we go back, we have to add the categories that we retrieved to cache so that next time we can use that and retrieve that rather than going to database. So I will say underscore cache dot, we have the method there, which is setString. You can see it expects key and a value. Caching is based on key value pairs. That is what we have right here. So we have to give this a unique key. Let me call this category list. Now of course I do not like magic strings, so typically you will have a constant and use that. But we will have to give it a unique key name, so next time we can use that key name to retrieve the value. Now the value that we need to assign here has to be a string. So we will have to convert that, and we will use JSON convert for that. We will have to add the using statement for newtonsoft.json, and we will serialize our object, which is the category list, and we will assign that to our cache. Simple as that. We did not have to write any complex code or initialize the Redis cache object. Nothing of that kind was required. We just have to call setString on the distributed cache, and it will automatically cache the value with the key name of category list. So perfect, we are adding that to our cache. Inside the cached category, let's retrieve the value of this category list. So we just say underscore cache dot get string. We have to pass the key name. Let's copy that to avoid any spelling mistake. Then if this cached category is null, we will go to database and store that. But if that is not null, we will have to deserialize that to a list of category. So we can say category list is equal to JSON convert, and we have the deserialize object, which will be a list of category, and we will pass the cached category. So with that, our logic is looking pretty solid. Now when we are running the Redis cache here, do not run on IIS Express. Make sure to select the same project name. That way when you run the project, it will open up the command prompt and it will launch the website. First time categories were loaded here, it would retrieve from the database and then it will add that to the Redis cache. But if you go on category here, and let's create one more category, I'll call this test with 4. It is displaying that inside the categories index page, because at that time it goes to database, but if we go to the home page, we do not see that because the data that is being retrieved here is cached. If I go back to the application, add a breakpoint here, let me load this to show that. I will press F10 here. You can see the cached category has all the data. The new category that was created, we did not add that in cache. So that way it is loading all the categories that are stored in cache every time unless the cache is cleared. How do we clear that? There are multiple ways of doing that. If we go back to Azure portal, inside the Azure cache for Redis, we can go to the console tab here and run the command flush all. That will flush all the cache, and if you go back to the application and refresh, this time you will notice the cache is null, so it goes to database and it retrieves the new record. Another way of doing that is, let me stop the application. Right here we have a command which is _cache.remove, and we have to give the key name, which is the category list that will remove the value of that key from our Azure Redis cache. So with this you have seen caching in action, but when you are using caching you have to be careful about few things. Let me walk you through those in the next video. We are using caching in our application, but what happens when you have to refresh the cache? Or what if you want to say that cache should expire in 1 hour or 1 day? We do not want the user to see stale data every time. So maybe the data is not time sensitive, but we want that after 10 minutes when the database has been changed, we want them to go to the database and get fresh data. How can we implement that when we are using Azure Cache? We can set all the options when we are setting a cache value. So when we are calling the setString here, we can create an object of distributed cache entry options. So we can call that options is equal to new, and then on that options we can set the absolute expiration time. So when it comes to expiration times, they are of two types. One is absolute and one is sliding. Sliding expiration basically means that if the cache has not been active for, let's say, 24 hours, then it will be expired. So if you have a key name of category list and you do not access that for 24 hours, in that case it will expire. But if you are accessing category list every hour, then it will not expire because your sliding expiration is 24 hours. The next type here is absolute expiration. This basically means that if you set a time like 60 minutes here, 60 minutes from the time the cache is set, it will expire. Even if you access every minute, then also it will expire after 60 minutes from when this cache was set the first time. So here, let me create a new time span. Let me make it 30 seconds for now. So with that, we have our options, but we need to add this options when we are setting the cache. So right here with the category list, we'll add a comma here. You can see we can also pass distributed cache entry options. So let me pass my options, which has the time span of 30 seconds. With that, let me run the application. Before we test anything, let's go to our Azure portal and flush all the cache that we have so far. And then if we go back to the application, we have cleared all the cache. So let me reload the page again. That way the cache will be set. So once the cache is set, let's go to category and create a new category. We only have 30 seconds. Once we create, let's go to the home page, not the categories. You can see it is not present here. That's great. Let's wait for 30 seconds. And once 30 seconds have been passed, if you refresh the page, you will see new data being loaded. So that proves that the cache that we had was invalidated, and then it went to the database to get new data. So with that, we have covered all the concepts with Azure Redis Cache, which is setting the cache getting the cache, and how to invalidate a cache. Before I wrap up this video, inside the console window here, we have advanced settings where you can configure the port, and if you want, you can also scale up the application by selecting the different tier if you notice that you are using more data. We also have multiple clusters, but that is only available in the premium tier, not in the basic tier. We have geo-replication, which will replicate your data across different geolocation. That way, in case of a disaster, your cache is not affected. But all of these features are premium pricing, so they are not available in the basic tier. Another thing I want to show you is the firewall setting. If you want that only certain IP address can use your Azure Redis cache, you can add that connection right here. But if no IP addresses are defined, then by default, any IP address is allowed to connect as long as the access key is valid. So we have more insights and monitoring that is available with Redis cache. But with this, you have seen how easy it was to configure Redis cache in a .NET application.